Kia ora and welcome to this episode of Shared Lunch, where we delve into the world of medicinal cannabis. It's a market that's said to have lots of promise, but it's proving quite tough for New Zealand companies. I'm Helen Mattison, and I'll be talking about this topic with CEO of Rua Bioscience, Paul Naske.
Investing involves risk. You might lose the money you start with. We recommend talking to a licensed financial advisor. We also recommend reading product disclosure documents before deciding to invest. Everything you're about to see and hear is current at the time of recording.
Welcome, Paul. How are things in the East Cape today?
Kia ora, Helen. A little bit wet and overcast, but we're boxing on. We've had our fair share of rain over the last few weeks.
So, Paul, before we jump into finding out what Rua Bioscience does, tell us about your background and how you came to be in this position.
Yeah, good question. I think my mother asks me that quite a bit, actually. How did you end up being CEO of a cannabis company? So I've lived in Tairāwhiti for nigh on 18 years. In that time, I've gotten to know a few people and done a bit of business here. And as Manu and Pānapa, who were the co-founders of the company, started the company, they reached out to me in the early days and sort of said, can you help? And I thought that what they were doing was excellent and brilliant, and I'd been watching what they'd been doing, and it was super exciting.
So your background is at forestry, and what else would you say that you've done? What's your skill set?
So yeah, I did a forestry degree in Australia many moons ago, and came over as a young graduate in my early 20s with Fletcher Forests, and I started off in forestry, but I moved into sales and marketing roles, business development roles, then Fletcher Paper, and then Fletcher Building and corporate roles, management roles. And so in Tairāwhiti, I moved to Tairāwhiti, worked for an agribusiness corn company, and from there did a little bit of other consulting work, and then landed myself in medicinal cannabis. So I've got a well-rounded set of skills in terms of business. I've done a bunch of different things.
There's a number of companies in New Zealand in the medicinal cannabis market, as it were, or they're supplying that market. At least 3 of them are listed. Your model is slightly different and it's changed recently. So can you tell us about that model, but also how are you different from your competitors?
Yeah, good question. Well, we have changed, and we listed in the end of 2020. And we started off like this is a new industry, and no one really knew how it was going to go. But we started off with a sense that we wanted to test manufacturing and test cultivation, and so we set up small cultivation and small manufacturing facilities in our region. And we've subsequently, as we learn more about the market and you delve into the nuances of the market and how it's all going, you soon realise that actually we've taken a view that New Zealand is not going to, or we won't be able to get a great return on capital if we manufacture products here in New Zealand. You've heard it ad nauseum, the regulatory environment in New Zealand doesn't lend itself well towards export, and yes, there has been some changes recently, but as you sort of work into the big wide world of cannabis, it's a very competitive world out there, and New Zealand is going to be a minnow in the scheme of things. So we've taken a view that we can't really get a return on capital for manufacturing products here in New Zealand. And we looked at our strengths, and we've got sort of our home and heart is in Ruatoria. As you know, the founding story of the company is about the dream of creating jobs for the people of the East Coast, particularly Ruatoria, and building on the strengths of the community as it relates to cannabis. And so we looked at what we were good at relative to others, and we've landed on a business model which, it is different. And the way it's different is if you think about the value chain of like normal agribusiness, like if you took apples, for example, you'd have apple seeds, and then you'd sort of grow apple trees, and then you'd create apples which would go into apple products. What we've done is we've sort of said that middle part of commercial cultivation and commercial manufacture, we're not going to do that. We're going to outsource that to others. But what we're really good at is we've got some links with good apple seeds or good cannabis genetics, and we've got distribution agreements with partners in the market. So we know sort of what distribution agreements distribution companies look like in overseas jurisdictions. And so we're going to outsource the capital intensive heavy bit in the middle, which is cultivating the apples or manufacturing the apples into apple pies, if you like. But we're going to link our apple seeds, cannabis genetics, with apple pies or cannabis products in different markets around the world. Now, that means we reduce the amount of money it takes. And so we've got a small team which works with cultivation partners to take our genetics and turn them into crops and products for overseas markets.
What do you define as cannabis genetics, just for listeners, so we understand?
Yeah, well, cannabis genetics is either like a cannabis seed or a small cannabis plant. Like if it was an apple seed or a small sort of apple plant ready to go. Cannabis is easily cloned, so you can sort of take clones and tissue cuttings off the plant, and you can export that, or you can sort of go to other people and sort of say, take this plant and propagate it into a commercial crop, please. So that's what we're doing.
So are there hundreds of varieties of cannabis then that you could be finding unique strains and you're discovering and breeding those? Is that a fair summation of what you're doing?
Hundreds, probably thousands. And it's really it's fascinating because, you know, like apples, there's like standard breeds, and kiwi fruits have got certain varieties, but like cannabis is really exciting because it's been in the black market for nigh on 70 years, all around the world, and like you've got this whole industry which is essentially coming out of a black market. So how do you define a cannabis variety is a real curious question. So there's lots of people who've been growing cannabis, as we know, in the community for like all those years, and in the black market, and so they've got varieties and cannabis genetics that they've been breeding for a long period of time. So we're using some of those and taking them into the market. And New Zealand's really quite unique. New Zealand, one of the good things about the New Zealand regulations that they put in place was the fact that you're allowed to, under the regulations, bring illicit genetics from the black market into the legal framework, and all of a sudden it's legal. Now, Canada had a similar amnesty situation, but that lasted for 6 months. But what we in New Zealand have a permanent amnesty, if you like. So with links to the black market and links to some illicit growers, we can bring varieties into the legal framework that aren't necessarily available to other consumers around the world or patients around the world.
Now, there's also a couple of aspects to your model. There's the breeding and development, which you've just explained, but there's also you on-sell products from other manufacturers. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so as part of our strategy, so what I've just outlined is our absolute commitment is to take strains from our community, varieties from our community, outsource the cultivation and manufacturing, and deliver those products into the markets that we choose, which is UK, Germany, Australia, and New Zealand. But of course, that actually takes time. Now, the thing with cannabis, it falls under a medicinal or a pharmaceutical regime. The process of doing that takes time. But in the meantime, heck, we need money. We're absolutely focused on sales and revenue and getting a return for our shareholders. In the very short term, what we do is we set up the pipelines. And that's basically ensuring that within each of the key jurisdictions that we operate in the first instance, we might have to buy someone else's genetics, if you like, the apple seeds, if you like. So we use someone else's to get the pipeline going, and then we are filling those pipelines over the next 1, 2, 3 years with genetics from our community. So that's quite different. We're not saying we're going to manufacture everything ourselves. We're saying we're going to work with other manufacturers and cultivators to create products using our genetics.
So when we think about those markets then, what's the relationships you have in those markets with new distributors? I mean, how does that work? Because that's pretty key, obviously, if you're wanting to generate revenue. And also, what would be the revenue split? I mean, as you say, the cultivation or the breeding, and the like does take time. At the moment, would be the revenue that's coming more from those cultivars and the like that you're sourcing from other companies?
Well, look, if your question's about like where do we think the relative profitability and sales are going to come from in the future, like, just walking through it, we've got 4 key markets that we're focused on: Germany, UK, Australia, and New Zealand. And we think fundamentally, in the short, medium term, Germany and Australia are going to be the key drivers of revenue and therefore associated profit margin. Germany, we launched our first product there last year. We're launching our second product there in Germany next week. And that's a really exciting market at the moment. Like, as of the 1st of April, the regulations changed in Germany, which allowed cannabis, like, there's a lot of detail, but fundamentally what it's meant is that cannabis is now more widely prescribed than it was before the 1st of April. There is very strong demand in Germany. And
Paul, can I just
launching
stop
product.
you there? Can we just be
Yeah.
clear that the reason that it is in demand is for what, mainly pain relief?
Yeah. Pain relief. It's all through a medicinal framework. So you have to have a doctor's prescription no matter what. What's happened is because, like I said, it's a little bit in the detail, but it's come down the schedule of controlled drugs, which has made it easier for prescribers in Germany to prescribe cannabis. And what that's done is it's opened up more patients and more avenues for doctors to prescribe. It's a little bit easier. So you've got an increase in demand since the 1st of April for patients. Predominantly, 70% of the prescriptions are for pain relief, typically chronic pain. You've got a next 20 or 30% is for anxiety, stress, PTSD, those sorts of conditions. So Germany's a very strong market at the moment, and we're really excited to be actually putting a product in there next week. And we think that that's going to go really well. Nimbus Health, who are our distributors over there, really supportive, extremely professional, and we've got a really good relationship with them. So that'll go well. Australia is a very big, strong, growing market. It's got a lower regulatory hurdles, easier to get into the market. So it's actually a lot more competitive. And we've got a guy on the ground over there who is our business development manager, and he's got a number of distribution channels that we work with, and the sales are growing over in Australia. But it's a slightly different environment insofar as the regulations that are in place. So because of the size of it, we think it's just going to be a bit of a cornerstone of our revenue and profit margin going forward. And those are the two, like Germany and Australia are the big ones. And then you've got UK, which is, in general terms, I'd sort of say 2 or 3 years behind Australia and Germany in terms of its growth. It's got a different environment insofar as the specialists have to prescribe the product. But what that means is that as they build up the systems, that's only going to yield growth insofar as, like, it's a very big market. You've got a population of 60 odd million people, and we know that there's demand, and the graphs are all going up in the UK.
That begs a question too about New Zealand. Is if those are the 3 markets, with Germany and Australia being the top ones, is there any potential here, or is it more that you're focused on export?
Well, from an early stage in our development, we've always realised that we have to focus on export markets to get a return on capital. I love New Zealand a bit. It's awesome, and we will be bringing product to the New Zealand market, but we're never going to be able to get a return on capital that we need unless we focus on export markets. And so, yes, we will be bringing product to the New Zealand market. In fact, we've got 2 approved recently by the New Zealand Ministry of Health, or Medicinal Cannabis Agency, and those products are coming to market very soon. But we do know in our spreadsheets and our graphs, it's always going to be a lot smaller. It's the population, of course, but it's our home market, and we have a compassionate access program here, which we certainly want to support local members of our community. So, yeah, and in terms of profit margin, it's number 4, but it's necessary.
And we're talking cannabis oil, are we, and the flowers, the dried flowers? Is that what a patient might use or a doctor might prescribe?
Yeah, so the product formats in all 4 key markets, you pretty much have 2 main product formats. Dried flower, as a herbal medicine, which you would vaporize, and oil, which you would either put under your tongue, oral oil, basically. And those two formats are the dominant ones. You're seeing a lot of growth in Germany in dried flower formats, and that's where our genetics from the community sort of play into that sort of format, more so than the oils.
Okay, so in New Zealand, particularly with the listed companies, it has been pretty tough, as I said at the beginning. You've got a number of companies, and we've had quite a tough time in terms of raising capital for those companies. Share prices have been in the doldrums. Let's get real, there's been nothing too great there for retail investors.
Yep.
You're pretty confident that you can turn things round. We've obviously had recently with Sharesies investors, a lot of them are in Canna South, and they're obviously in voluntary administration. So the environment is quite tough, and particularly for retail investors trying to figure this out. But you seem to think that, right, okay, we've changed our model, we can actually go a different path, and you're pretty confident that you can, reap some rewards.
Oh, look, I'm extremely confident because we took a really hard decision as a company 18 months, 2 years ago. That was a tough decision to shut down our manufacturing because, I myself basically designed it, planned it. We'd been working for years on what we're going to do and manufacture in New Zealand, and that was the hope and the dream. But
is that
the real
a plant, Paul, that's in Ruatoria? Is that the...
No, this one's in Gisborne. So
right.
we've got, 2 facilities, a cultivation in Ruatoria and manufacturing, which looks like extraction and bottling, an aspect like that in Gisborne. So we had to shut the Gisborne one down. I mean, the reality is costs a lot of money. So we made the decision about 18 months, 2 years ago, and we've been talking with distributors in Germany and Australia for a number of years. So we understand where we think we can add value. So I'm confident because A, we've got a low cost base, and B, we're in 3 markets now, and by October we'll be in the UK with a portfolio of products. So in 3 to 4 months' time, we'll be in 4 markets with 4 revenue streams. Now, the challenge will be like growing those sales and telling the Rua story. And we've got something different. We're actually different to many other cannabis companies in New Zealand and around the world, insofar as we've got genetics on the front end of the value chain, and we've got distribution channels out the other with a strong, grounded brand in our values, basically. And we're linking the 2 of those up. There's lots of companies who do distribution, lots of companies who've got brands, lots of companies are telling a unique story, and lots of companies are doing genetics on their own. But there's no one doing genetics on the one hand and putting that through a value chain and branding it out the other end with a strong New Zealand-centric brand focused on sort of our founding community, and telling that story proudly. So I do think we're extremely different, and I do think we've got a bright future for sure. No one's saying it's not tough. It's definitely tough.
Yeah.
And I honestly, we've been at this for 5 years, and look at where we are now. We're sort of like some of the markets we're just getting into the UK. So it's long and tough and arduous, and that's necessarily it's the face of this industry because of the fact it comes under a pharmaceutical and medicinal regime. I mean, I can't change the regulations as much as I'd love to, but we're playing within the sandpit that we've got, and within this sandpit, we've got some fence posts and some guardrails which are governed by governments and regulators around the world, and we've just got to play with that. Which means, yes, it does take time, and I'm really sorry to investors for that, but that's the reality. These things just do take time.
I suppose there will be some proof in the pudding, and maybe it's too soon come end of August when you announce your full year results. I see that you don't give forecasts. That's quite tough for retail investors. I mean, how do they become informed, and how do they know that what they're backing, has some substance, if you like?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're loath and reluctant to put out forecasts. This is I still think this industry is a very new and early industry. We're starting to bed down some of the pipelines and bed down the processes, and it's becoming a little bit more systematic and formulaic.
Just wondering though about your model. You talk about in your commentary being capital light. Can you kind of explain what you mean by that?
Well, we've got very low overheads. We've very small number of employees relative to our potential. I mean, we've got I think 13 people, not all full time. As I said, we've closed down our manufacturing facility, and we're looking to sort of capitalise on that and sell that and turn that into cash. We've got our Ruatoria facility. When we built the Ruatoria facility, we were conscious of sort of saying let's not overcapitalise, which build a small minimum viable sort of operation sort of to prove what's possible, because we didn't really know how the regulations were going to go. No one knows how the market's going to evolve, but so that's what we mean by capital light. We've spent small amounts in Ruatoria, and we've got a small team. We don't have a large manufacturing environment, so that's what we mean.
What about cash burn and cash flows? If you don't give forecasts, can you tell us a bit about those?
Yeah, so I mean, I can answer that sort of, over the last 18 months to 2 years, we've reduced our cash burn by about 50%. We were consuming about 3.8 million in cash in a 6-month period 2 years ago. Now we're down to less than half that at sort of about 1.6 million in a 6-month period. So yeah, we've taken the view that we cannot keep spending the amount of money that we were.
That inevitably leads me to think that you probably need to capital raise. I know that you are looking at various options. Can you shed any light on that for us?
Well, no, I can't really go into a lot of detail. Suffice to say that, yep, we are looking at options. I mean, I look at all the options for our cash in and our cash out. And as we increase sales, obviously we need less cash. And we're on the cusp of increasing sales, as I sort of said, in Germany and the UK. So, yeah, at this stage, nothing much to add apart from we're in conversations with larger shareholders, of course, looking at options. But, yeah, nothing more to add than that.
Just one thing too that might be or might not be material is that I know you've got a bit of a court case happening in Victoria and Australia with a supply agreement. Can you give us any update on that?
It's with the lawyers. We're going through the process. We feel like we've got a very strong case. But yeah, we will inevitably end up in mediation in the not too distant future. And I suppose after that mediation, we'll have an update for the market then. What I can say was it's a disagreement over the territory. We feel we've got rights to the Australian market. And yeah, we believe we've lost out because of that.
If we look at the Australian market though, you do think there's promise there in terms of both supplying the genetics and also selling product?
Oh, look, and I'd say, like for all markets, that there's one fundamental thing about all the cannabis markets that we operate in, and probably all the cannabis markets that we don't operate in, that across Australia, New Zealand, Germany, and the UK, a lot of the data that I've seen is that the current medicinal cannabis market is approximately 10% of the illegal black market. So what's fundamentally driving it is that the legal framework is in almost every jurisdiction in the world is opening up. The pie for legal cannabis is only going to get bigger from this point on. And you were seeing that in Germany. And what that is having a flow-on effect to other markets in Europe, for example. France is, in January 2025, loosening its grip insofar as it's now allowing specialist doctors to prescribe medicinal cannabis.
Just to finish, Paul, I want to talk about what you're bringing to the community, particularly Ruatoria, the East Cape, and also I think we talked about the sponsorship of patients for those who need medicinal cannabis but perhaps can't afford it, because I imagine it isn't subsidised in this country. Can you enlighten me there?
Most medicines have lots of clinical trials, lots of data, lots of evidence backed up by years and years of research. Medicinal cannabis, by virtue of the fact it's been in the black market, there's not a lot of research being done on it. It falls in an area called Section 29, or an unapproved medicine. So it falls within an area of medicine that basically means that patients have to pay for it. It's private pay, and that's the same in the UK, same in Australia, same in New Zealand. So, but we know it does have benefit for a number of patients, And when the company was started, when we got our first products into the market through our own manufacturing, the company started a compassionate access program. We sponsor 30 patients in our community that can't afford it. So it's all driven by doctors. If a doctor sort of says that this patient can't afford it, and I think they would benefit from medicinal cannabis, they apply to the scheme to get the patient approved, and that patient's on the list. It's a small cost of the business, but we think it's worth it for our community. I think we're going to 52 patients with another supplier that's actually come on board. So it's a small give back to the community, but we passionately believe that this medicine makes a difference to people's lives.
So, Paul, there has been some changes to the regulations in terms of medicinal cannabis in New Zealand just recently. Can you tell me what sort of effect that is going to have?
The big overarching change, if I was to summarise it, fundamentally the regulations are tweaked such that it's easier for New Zealand manufacturers to export products to the world. Much, much easier.
Thanks, Paul, for your insights today. It's been great to have you on.
No worries.
And thanks, everyone, for tuning in. You can watch Shared Lunch on YouTube or follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. Leave us a rating and a comment about what you'd like to hear about next. See you next time.